Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight as we kickstart District 48's Congressional Debate Series with the debate on women's rights and issues. Let me start by stating that, as many of you know, the contenders tonight were decided based on a formula that has been developed specifically for this purpose. It's called the Voter Support Score, which is an objective, verifiable way of gauging how many voters support each candidate. The equation is as follows. 45% is weighted by the number of individual donations from within the district. That is, measuring the act of donating, not the amount of it, not the dollar amount. 25% is weighted by the dollar amount of in-district donations, and the remaining 30% is measured by the total amount of cash on hand, including in-district donations and excluding campaign loans. As you can see, in-district donations are counted 3 times in this formula, whereas outside money is counted only once. What this means is that this formula, the VSS, brings power back to the district. You have the ultimate say when you go out there and support your favorite candidate. And so far you have done so, and we have the 4 top-ranked candidates, and because this is a special debate on women's issues, and because also our representative Dana Rohrabacher declined to join us today, we're going to have, are you disappointed, seriously? We're going to have 6 contenders because women, unlike Congress, as we stated on our Facebook post, unlike Congress, women will always have a seat at the table when women's issues are in discussion. If you still have questions about our voter support score, the VSS, we've got your back. We've developed a cartoon specifically just for this. You can grab a copy at our table at the end of the debate. We'll also post it later tonight, and we're always there to answer any questions you have about this process and the ranking and how rigorously it was done. That said, let's start the night. With all the pressing issues and the attacks on our freedoms since the inauguration of Donald J. Trump as our president, many might be wondering why we decided to start with a debate on women's issues. I hope many of you have come to the conclusion that lasting change starts with women. We are half of this society. If you look around, if you go to any grassroots meeting, if you go to any demonstration, street action, you name it, 90% of the participants are women. Yes, woohoo, yes, that's no small feat. The power and empowerment of women has been felt so much so that 2018 has been called the year of the woman, or as we in Indivisible here like to call it, the year of indivisible women. So it seemed only natural then that, to start with the conversation on women's rights. Before we start the debate, however, a few points to keep in mind. On September 5th, 1995, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton said women's rights are human rights at the United Nations 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing. Yet, to this day, we often forget that women's rights are not only exclusively limited to the issues like Me Too, movement, or getting access to medical care and the freedom to make decisions about our own bodies. This is important and must be fought for because it is under attack bigly. But to see only these issues as women's issues is myopic. Trans issues, business loans, immigration, domestic violence, over-incarceration, Islamophobia, refugees, black families not having water, the homeless in Santa Ana, these are all women issues. While we make over 50% of the population, our voice only makes up less than 30% of the decision makers. Stephanie Hammerworld, right here, posted on Facebook today an example of why we need women in public office, saying that if most of our reps look the same, there's a risk that issues like access to basic hygiene products by incarcerated women won't ever be addressed. To me, this shouldn't even be up for debate. Incarcerated women should have easy access to basic hygiene products, and I wonder if there would have been much discussion if more women were sitting on this committee. Diversity in representation matters, and I cannot agree more with Stephanie. The days of platitude like the future is female, or claiming to be a feminist while actually working against us are over. Time's up. Because we must remember that the threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That every issue is a woman's issue that impacts all of us differently along class, race, orientation, age, ability, and more. So time's up for silence and complicity. But more importantly, time's up for traditional women movement. We're reminded that the Women's March last year that drew millions of people across the world out in protest for women's rights was organized by women of color. On that note, it is my honor to invite Laura Cantor, the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the LGBT Center, to talk about LGBT rights as women's rights. Laura.
Hi, good evening. I want to thank Erin McCall and Lulu Hamad for being, woohoo! Let's all thank them for doing this, and the other amazing volunteers that I'm sure will be thanked. I want to also thank them for being intentional about inclusivity by inviting an openly queer woman to speak tonight about LGBT issues as women's issues. So as soon as she gets here, someone let us know, because just kidding, it's me. This is important that we have an opportunity to speak rather than just being mentioned in someone else's remarks. What is difficult is that queer, lesbian, bi, and transgender women are generally tokenized within the women's movement. Even if we play leadership roles, we are not centered. It kind of looks like lesbian issues go with LGBT rights, not women's rights. We are those other kinds of women. The thing is, every issue is a woman's issue. When you try to make a woman's issue something else, it's still a woman's issue. Sexual harassment is a woman's issue that affects men. Because when men are sexually harassed, the dynamics of power and shame they must navigate exist because sexual abuse is an inherently sexist act. So when we talk about policy change, we need to get to know how to address the fundamental issues of sexism and the power relations that operate at all levels of society, both personal and political. The fundamental right to sexual health and bodily autonomy is not enough if we cannot live our lives with dignity and free from violence and discrimination. So when we talk about women's issues, we must talk about what happened in this district when a 19-year-old gay Jewish college student was stabbed to death by a 20-year-old man who was involved in neo-Nazi activities. Yes, this is also a women's issue. What were these young men taught about being gay? Because gayness is a women's issue. Ask a gay man to explain how the denigration and oppression of women are levied in the denigration and oppression of gay men. How will these candidates fight for the rights and well-being of lesbian, bisexual, queer, and transgender women in Orange County? Because transgender health is a women's issue. Lesbian reproductive rights are a women's issue. The mistreatment of transgender women of color in prison is a women's issue. The fact that up to 50% of homeless youth identify as LGBT is a women's issue. We have learned that from the last election that fundamental women's inequality is not enough to bring most white women voters to vote for someone who might actually believe in women's equality. I would offer that the only way we can achieve the change we need to make is that we have to have women in positions of leadership, and this must include lesbian, bisexual, queer, and transgender women. A 2005 United Nations report suggests that we need at least 30% women, that's the critical mass, in any legislative body to change the tide. It makes sense to me. We need enough women in the room to remind the men how to behave. I'm right, right? A bunch of men making all the decisions together does not work. There is no balance. How will these candidates work to grow the active participation of women, including queer and transgender women, and the incorporation of our perspectives at all levels of decision-making? How will these candidates insist that the political reputation of this district, you know, where old Republicans go to die, and the access to power, how will they insist that the political reputation of this district and the access to power from an anti-woman and anti-LGBT administration will not dictate how they lead moving forward? I look forward to their answers and to tonight's questions, and I'm again grateful to Erin and Lulu for centering and not just tokenizing the LGBT community. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for these very thoughtful words that you've shared with us. And again, we can't agree more with you. Tonight's debate, we're not just looking for candidates with platitudes, just in line with what Laura has said. We are looking for a champion. Believe it or not, you guys there, we're looking for a champion of women's rights across every intersection of a woman's experience, not just for the privileged amongst us. This is really important. This has, if anything, that the Trump administration has shown us in the resistance is how women are leading the resistance. And again, if you look at the resistance led by those women, many come from very, very diverse backgrounds, and this is really crucial. Without further ado, let me introduce Joanna Weiss, our moderator for tonight. Joanna Weiss is president and founder of Women for American Values and Ethics, WAVE, a women's political action committee, grassroots and community organization. Ms. Weiss is former litigator with Latham & Watkins LLP and an adjunct professor at Chapman University School of Law. She's also a past recipient of the ACLU First Amendment Award. Joanna Weiss.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, our co-hosts, my fellow WAVE women, and Orange Coast College. I will be explaining the format of the debate and the rules. This will be a moderator-run debate. Constituent and audience questions were submitted to the debate hosts either via social media or submitting questions here tonight. All questions were reviewed and screened by the moderator team and our co-hosts for relevance and duplication. The debate format will be as follows. Each candidate will have a 90-second opening statement. I will then proceed to ask questions and will specify whether the question is for a particular candidate, multiple candidates, or for everyone on stage. Candidates have 90 seconds to respond. If a candidate refers to an opponent in a response, the candidate mentioned will have 30 seconds to respond. The exchange ends here unless I feel that a follow-up question is needed to expand upon the issue. Candidates will have a 60-second closing statement relevant to the debate topic here tonight. The final question of the debate will be a candidate question to another candidate. The candidate will have 30 seconds to ask a question, and the opponent will have 60 seconds to respond. Questions must be within the code of conduct, and they've been subject to moderator approval. We will also be having live fact-checking at the debate here tonight, so candidate statements will be verified as we go along. I am joined by our esteemed fact-checking team. Gia-Lisa Gaffney is an adjunct professor of political science and law, teaching courses in sexual orientation and law and women in American politics. A graduate of Duke University School of Law, she is editor-in-chief of Orange County Lawyer magazine. She is a founding member of Women for American Values and Ethics, part of the steering committee for Orange County Equality Coalition, and a past board member of OCEC. She intervenes on behalf of children who are targeted in public schools in violation of California law. Stephanie Hammerwald, has worked in human resources for over a decade. Her experience spans multiple industries, including manufacturing, distribution, and grocery. She currently works at a tech startup in Irvine. In 2016, Stephanie founded Pacific Reentry Career Services, an all-volunteer Orange County-based nonprofit that helps formerly incarcerated people find meaningful employment. Through her nonprofit, she also works closely with employers to advocate for fair chance hiring practices. Stephanie holds a master's degree in women's studies. Katie Calvota, studied economics at University of California, Berkeley, where she graduated in 3 years. Founder of Newport Wealth Management, in 2011, Ms. Calvota was awarded the Rising Star of Hedge Funds by Institutional Investor. Her firm also has received many accolades, including Angel Investor of the Year in 2014 and the Women in Wealth Award for Best Business Leader in Real Estate Investment in 2016. Today, Ms. Calvota spends most of her time as a philanthropist and impact investor. Her groundbreaking innovative philanthropy program with Orange County Community Foundation recently was highlighted in OCCF's 2017 annual report. I believe I can speak for all of the debate hosts, the candidates, and our fact-checking team when I say thank you for being here tonight. We are inspired by your desire to learn more about the candidates, and we are inspired by your initiative in being active, educated voters. And now I would like to introduce the candidates. In reverse voter support score order, Rachel Payne. Michael Cottitt. Laura Oatman. Omar Siddiqui. Hans Kierstead. And Harley Ruda. The candidates will now be able to give their opening statements. They have 90 seconds each, and we'll start in voter support score order, beginning with Mr. Ruda.
Thank you. I'm Harley Ruda, and I'm running for the 48th District against Putin's favorite Congressman, Dana Rohrabacher. And I'd like to thank WAVE and Planned Parenthood and Indivisible OC48 for hosting this great event, and for all of you for coming. So give yourselves a round of applause. I'd like to take you back to 1848, Seneca Falls, New York, where in many ways the suffragette movement came to an important milestone, where these powerful, brilliant, brave women got together and formalized a conference to make sure that women's right to vote moved forward. And they fought day in and day out for the next 70 years to accomplish that. They were jailed, they were harassed, they were humiliated, yet they persevered until 1920, when the 19th Amendment finally passed. But we've continued to march for another 100 years. And we continue to march every year until we have equal pay, equal rights, equal access, equal opportunity, and equal respect. And we will keep marching with those women from 1848 until all of that occurs. Thank you for attending tonight. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Dr. Kierstead?
Well, thank you very much for all of you for being here tonight. You know, I know that probably a lot of you are looking up here and thinking, this guy is straight, he is a man, he is wealthy, and I get it, talking in this type of, on these issues. But if there's one thing I'd like you to take away is that I'm here, I'm with you, and I'm listening. I grew up on a farm with a single mother most of my childhood, with no child support, no alimony, growing our own food and making our own clothes. I've seen what it's like for a single woman to have to deal with the hardships. And I don't want any mother to deal with that anxiety and that hardship that my mother did. I don't want anyone to have to live that life. For me, this society begins, justice begins, when women's rights are human rights. When a girl growing up knows for certain in her soul that her path goes only as far as her own dreams and will and desire and hard work gets her, and where every woman doesn't have to put up with harassment in the classrooms and in the boardrooms and in Olympic training camps. When our president can't get away and just summarily dismiss vile comments as, you know, locker room chatter. I feel that this issue is paramount above all else. And for those women that are fighting that fight every day in a world that's stacked against them.
Sorry, Dr. Kierstead, we have to stop there. We'll move to Mr. Siddiqui.
Sorry about that.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Omar Siddiqui, and I'm running for Congress in California's 48th District against Dana Ruschabacker. I start my story tonight with my mother. I was about 7 years old, and I remember my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And I remember the doctors didn't give her a very long time to live. And I remember her telling me that she's been invited with God and she had to leave. Now, mind you, I was 7, and I remember it vividly like it was yesterday. And she said, it's time for me to go. And I said to her, well, if God's invited you, why can't I go with you? Right? I didn't understand it. But she reminded me of a mission. She said, take care of your father, take care of your sister, and most importantly, you know, take care of your country, take care of the people you love. That was 40 years ago, and my mom adjusted my tie as I walked in today. So my mom's still with me. But that experience is with me too. That experience took me to engineering school. I got my bachelor's and master's in engineering. It took me to law school. I became a trial attorney, and I subsequently became an FBI advisor, and now I'm running for Congress to effectuate change for women's issues. Thank you.
Ms. Oatman?
Thank you, Joanna. Hello, everybody. I am Laura Oatman. I'm your homegrown, organically sourced, locally sourced candidate running in District 48. I'm a UCI and UCLA alumna. I lived in district since 1976. I've raised my 5 kids here. My husband and I met in architecture school 35 years ago or so, and we've been married 33 years. Raised all 5 kids here. We both worked in the architectural field for years for big corporate firms. I worked for a large firm that designed resort hotels around the world, a lot of them sustainable green hotels, sustainable communities. 2008, we got wiped out, as a lot of folks did in the building industry. Husband and I both lost our jobs. We didn't skip a beat. We started Oatman Architects. And for the last 8 years, 10 years now, we've been slowly but surely growing our way back up to financial security and stability under the Obama administration. So when Trump was elected last year, I felt again like I had just slammed into a brick wall. And I thought, oh my God, everything that we have worked for the last 8 years suddenly is at risk again. So I'm running for 3 big reasons. My 3 big reasons are climate change, jobs, and a progressive economy that works for everybody, not just the 0.01 percenters, and for women's rights. Now, I've worked in a male-dominated field my entire life. I raised 4 boys, and so
Time
nobody
is, excuse me,
is better suited to go to DC than I.
We'll move. We'll move on to Mr. Kotick.
Good evening. Gosh, it's great to see everyone here. My name is Michael Kotick. I was born and raised in Southern California. I've built my career in business, but instead of talking about me, and I'll make sure to filter that in throughout the course of the evening, I want to talk about everyone here. And I want to talk about what we're all here to do, which is to flip the 48th district. What's fascinating about what it's going to take to flip this district is we are going to have to fundamentally bring a different type of candidate forward to do it, because the same old thing will no longer pass. Because the truth is while you have polls and you have experts saying that this district will flip, it will not flip because other people say it should. It'll flip because we put a candidate forward that doesn't just say the fancy lines to say, but actually feels what they mean. And that's what we have to do here tonight. I challenge all of you, for all of us on the stage, look at what we're saying and see if we believe it. See if we feel it, and make your decisions from there. Because we need a new type of candidate, and that time is absolutely right now, because Dana Rohrabacher has to go.
Ms. Payne.
Good evening, and thank you so much to the organizers for putting this important discussion together. I'm Rachel Payne. I'm an executive in business and a technology entrepreneur, and I understand what it takes to lead. I've focused most of my career on technology that creates greater possibilities for everyone, and policies that ensure a place for everyone in the new economy. I've also been at the forefront of the tech revolution, and I've run my own company. In fact, I'm currently a CEO of a think tank called Fem Inc. When it comes to breaking glass ceilings, well, you know, I've been in tech for 20 years, and it's not lacking in men. So we need more women in that industry, but we also need more women in Washington, D.C. When I was being interviewed by Sheryl Sandberg to be on the founding team as the first hire of Google.org, she asked me a question. Are you prepared to help solve some of the world's hardest problems? And I said, yes, Sheryl, I was born to do this. I got that job, and now I want to get this job and help fight for people who need our support. I have been focusing on women's issues for 25 years, and I can bring that fight to Congress, and I ask you, join me in that fight. Thank you.
Our first question will be asked of all 6 candidates. You will each have 90 seconds to respond. We will go in voter support score order again. If elected, what would be your 3 top legislative priorities? Mr. Ruda?
Thank you. The 3 key priorities that I've talked about on the campaign trail all along is first and foremost is addressing the healthcare needs of our country. We have seen the ACA be decimated by Donald Trump and the alt-right, systematically reduced to far less than it was meant to be. Yet we have the same problems. 30 million Americans without health care, 18.5% of our GDP spent on health care, yet metrics that would show us in the bottom quartile against the other 39 industrialized developed countries. So I am in support of Medicare for all and opening up that public option immediately. Also implementing the individual mandate. That has to be back in place as well. A second key priority is rights. And whether it's women's rights, workers' rights, voter rights, immigration rights, refugee rights, LGBT rights, we are under attack by Trump and his cohorts. And we have to stand shoulder to shoulder, locked arm in arm, to fight for our rights. And then finally, thank you, finally is climate change. Climate change is an insidious, slow-moving, greatest challenge to generations to come, and we need to address it now. And whoever addresses it is going to create clean tech and clean energy jobs and have an opportunity to transform not just the world, but the area of the country they live in. And the place that should be it is Southern California. Southern California should be the hallmark of clean tech, clean energy, and on the forefront of solving climate change.
Dr. Kierstead.
Well, my three priorities are healthcare, the environment, and jobs. So as a 30-year expert in healthcare, I have been called to the Hill several times, working with congressmen and senators to enact changes. I have worked here in the state, helping with Proposition 71, a $3 billion initiative that worked out to add thousands and thousands of jobs to California and in several countries throughout the world. Healthcare is just a right. It's not a privilege. This is a right. And there is no reason whatsoever where the most powerful country in this world cannot provide healthcare for every citizen. Thank you. Medicare for all is the crux of that, and we've got to fight to make it work, and I have been developing 3 bills that do exactly that I will introduce in my first day of Congress, while simultaneously putting a Medicare for all program in. In addition, the environment. We have seen systematic denigration. This is nothing short of a national emergency, with denigrations of all of our environmental systems, protections, and consumer protections being eroded at the benefit of one group only, and that is large corporations. And lastly, job development. We've got a tax code that's exactly flipped, rewarding huge corporations rather than the employers, the innovators, you, bringing up healthcare into the business sector in a way that is affordable so we can make jobs and protect the working class. Otherwise, we will be stripping our working class and becoming the equivalent of an economy of Venezuela.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Before we continue with Mr. Siddiqui, in order to get out of here close to the time we're supposed to, if you could use the green and red cards that you've been given to indicate your maybe the green cards instead of applause, we can move the debate along a little bit faster. So if we can maybe stop with the applause as much and hold up those green signs. Again, it's being live streamed, and so people, it's a very visible way of showing your approval. Mr. Siddiqui.
Thank you. Sure. Stop the applause now, right? My priorities would be, number one, national security. I think Dana Rohrabacher is a national security threat, and I have grave concern that there is an uncomfortable feeling about our democracy and the interference of Russia or any other foreign entity in our election system. As an FBI advisor on national security and counterterrorism, having worked with FBI Director Comey, having worked with CIA Director John Brennan, I know national security, and that is going to be a priority for me. Number two is human rights. That includes women's rights are human rights, LGBTQ+ rights, immigration rights. We need a clean DACA bill for the dreamers. We need to make sure that those dreamers have a path to citizenship. And lastly, as part of that, we need a single-payer healthcare system for all Americans. We need to put care back into healthcare. I have many more, but those are the top 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to Ms. Oatman.
The reason I am standing up here today is climate change. I grew up in Los Angeles before the Environmental Protection Act was in place, and I remember the smog was so bad that we couldn't even go outside and play recess when I was a kid. I remember the 1968 oil spill in Santa Barbara, and the beaches down in Santa Monica were covered with these poor seals and seabirds covered in oil and gasping for air, and that just had a huge impact on me. So when I went to UCLA Architecture School, my thesis project was a sustainable green hotel, and throughout my career in architecture, I have been building projects and designing projects that have to do with helping our environment in addition to creating jobs. So my major focus when I get to Congress will be addressing and finding solutions for climate change. And the great thing is, additionally, where the Democrats really lost their way last time was we stopped talking about jobs. And we can come up with a plan, and there's nobody better than an architect to come up with a plan where we can create jobs and solve climate change by looking at rebuilding our electric and transportation infrastructure across America. And here locally, too, we can get to work immediately with community choice energy, where we can create climate action plans in our local cities.
Thank you, Ms. Oatman.
And fight offshore oil drilling. Thank you.
Moving on, Mr. Kotick, your top 3 legislative priorities.
So I'll take a little bit of a broader stance, and I think definitely make this a hyper-localized perspective. And that is, I think the biggest thing that we have an opportunity to send someone to Washington, D.C. to do is to fight for our abilities to compete with the cost of living as it increases right here in Orange County. That includes finally someone fighting for affordable housing so people don't have to say that the fear that they will never be able to grow up or to live in the place where they grew up. That includes job training programs, because I have to tell you, unemployment is not a problem here. The fact is people are not trained for the jobs that are available. And that also includes, last but not least, we do have to touch education. Education is being underfunded, is being undersupported, and when 50% of third graders cannot read at a third grade level, I think we are doing something fundamentally wrong. So, cost of living being the first. Second, absolutely about the environment and creating green jobs. And last but certainly not least, we do have to talk about healthcare, and I know we will get into it. Healthcare is a right, but we have to make sure that we put healthcare forward in a way that it cannot be politicized. I think we are feeling the effects of a politicized healthcare system, and that's just wrong.
Ms. Payne?
My 3 priorities focus on the economy, healthcare, and climate change. But very specifically, when we look at economic issues, many of these issues are gendered. For instance, the #1 lever to drive economic growth in this country is equal pay for equal work. Yeah, I know what that feels like. Secondly, we need to look at how do we create the jobs of the future, and that's for everyone. That means we have to invest in our education system, in STEM careers, making sure people can not only go into those fields, but create the jobs of the future, which brings me to access to capital. Where women only get 3% of capital, we need to fix that. Secondly, the issue of health care is a gendered issue. When women pay more for insurance, when women don't have access to contraception, when our reproductive freedom and our rights are infringed upon, that is a gendered issue. And this administration is taking us to a gender war, and that is not what we need in this country. We need to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, because 1 in 4 women will be raped in her lifetime, and 1 in 6 women deal with sexual harassment in the workplace, which, by the way, is also an economic issue. Thirdly, we have to look at climate change, because we live here and nobody wants their house underwater. Nobody wants sea level rise to affect our ability to live here and create a family, and we need green collar jobs. And having worked in tech and worked at a fund that actually invested in climate change solutions with innovative technology and utility scale infrastructure while I was at Google, I know that we can do that here because I've done it. And so I think this is the opportunity of a lifetime for us to bring this innovation to this district. Thank you.
Our next question will be for Mr. Ruda. If you had the opportunity to pass one piece of landmark legislation that would have the greatest impact benefiting women, what would it be?
That's a great question. Thank you. I would pivot and tell you still it's healthcare, because healthcare impacts women in a greater disproportionate way than men. And in addition, it affects minorities even greater. When you look at, we talked about this earlier, and I think everybody on this stage recognizes that addressing health care is one of the major things that needs to be addressed in the United States. I mentioned there are 39 industrialized developed countries, including the United States. All of the other industrialized developed countries in the world have universal health care, have single-payer systems in place. The only one that doesn't is the United States. We ironically have 4 systems. We have the national system, which is very much like what Canada has. We also have what's called the Bismarck system. It was started in Germany. That's the employer-employee model. We also have the Beveridge model, which was started in England. That's at Veteran Affairs. And we also have a program which is no insurance for 30 million Americans. And it's unfortunate, you know, and that's why we spend 18.5% of our GDP. Healthcare is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. It is a leading cause of homelessness in the United States. So we have to get healthcare addressed, and that includes, as far as specific items for women's rights, we should have free, accessible birth control across the United States. And women should have 100% control of their reproductive rights. And we should have 12 weeks of parental leave, like other advanced countries.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
believe it's the
Ruda.
U.S. and New Guinea are the only two that don't. Thank you.
Dr. Kierstead, currently women constitute approximately 19% of the House of Representatives. How can we get more women, particularly women of color, into political office and move Congress toward representing society at large?
Well, you know, it begins with local support. You know, as a congressman, I've said this to many of the local elected officials, that I think we need to do something that Dana Rohrabacher has never done, and that is stand beside local officials. Most elected officials come up through other areas, and we need to stand right beside them in order to help them in all of their local issues, and it needs to have an emphasis on women. We have so few representatives there, and let's face it, the issues are completely different. And we have had a systematic denigration of women's issues in the House and in the Senate and in the administration. We've seen Trump roll back the contraception mandate so that companies now don't have to offer it. We've seen Trump stack anti-women's issues in the House and in the administration with you know, the chief of staff to the assistant secretary to the HHS being a you know, absolute vehement anti-abortion advocate. We've seen the undermining of Medicaid, which provides most help to women and underprivileged individuals. We just can't have that anymore. It's time that we stand up, help women get into these power positions that they need to be occupying to represent their community.
Mr. Siddiqui, this next question will be for you first, and then we will ask the other candidates in VSS order. You will each have 90 seconds to respond. It relates to what Dr. Kierstead was just speaking about. The Me Too movement has shown that workplace harassment is prevalent, even though legislation exists that bans it. How would you change workplace culture to curb harassment? Can you provide specific examples of how you have worked to change the culture within your own companies or campaign to prevent harassment and support women?
Thank you. That is an excellent question. And for starters, it goes down to everyone to change their attitude towards how we treat each other. It goes down to basic decency and dignity and respect that we have for our coworkers, our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, our brothers, everyone. What needs to happen is employers need to take responsibility for the actions of their employees. There needs to be incentivized offers where there has to be on-the-job training for harassment. There has to be on-the-job training for different issues pertaining to exactly what constitutes harassment and how it can be reported. There are, I myself being an attorney, there are many circumstances where after someone's been harassed, they don't know where to go. They don't have opportunities to reach out to HR, and the companies simply aren't doing enough. Another thing that needs to happen to pass legislation to do this is the laws need to become stricter. From Title IX, the Equal Amendments Act, they all need to start to recognize that we are living in a society where men have to recognize that this is no longer tolerable. Time's up for men.
Mr. Ruda, we'll start with you in the VSS order.
I'll take the question in reverse order. From a business standpoint, I've had the privilege with a lot of help and support of managing companies from early stage all the way up to almost 10,000 people. And I am proud of the fact that in a company of almost 10,000 people, the vast majority of them were women. Not just at the sales level, but at the mid-level management, executive management throughout the company. I'm very proud of the fact that two of the largest real estate brands in the United States, ERA and Better Homes and Garden, are run by two women who I used to work with and hired. And I believe that to really address the issues of prejudiceness, not just with women, but everywhere, this has to really be started at a young age. And if you're familiar with the Representation Project, it talks about how systematic sexism is in our culture and delivered to kids at a small age through advertising on through their later adult years. If we don't get women in positions of power in advertising, entertainment, film, technology, every major industry, and most importantly, government, we're not going to be able to affect the systematic issues that are harnessed at that bottom level from birth. And so let's address it there, because we can pass legislation, but if we don't change hearts and minds, the legislation isn't going to matter.
Dr. Kierstead.
This issue is something that it's in our classrooms and it's in our companies, it's in our state legislative hallways, and it's in Congress. What we have to do in the first instance is indeed education, and it's bringing changes into your own place of work. I can only hope that the Me Too movement has the lasting effect that it deserves. We all need to sit back and wonder what environments we've created in our own workplace that may be conducive to abuse and change those things. We need to speak out to our own employers, our own employees, and say what behavior can actually be changed. So it's education, but it's also the responsibility lies with each and every individual, whether you're in a power position or you're not, to speak up, to speak out, to change. The issue is at the national level, certainly, where we need wage inequality fixed, we need pink tax addressed, we need all of those injustices that Trump has put into place, stacking this world against women's rights, reversed. It also has to be at the state level. You know, just last year we saw 30 pro-choice actions in 16 states, but we saw 56 pro-life actions in 26 states. So this is not being handled on a state level like it needs to be handled. So we have—
Thank you, Dr. Kierstead. Yeah. Mr. Siddiqui. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
I'll go again if you want.
Omar, you have more to say.
Mr. Kotick. Mrs. Oat. Let's see here.
I think it's Laura.
Ms. Oatman.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you.
Yeah. Time is up. Time is up. You know, I worked many years ago in the service industry. When I was at UC Irvine, I used to work at a little place called Pacific Coast Diner. I don't know if you remember that. I was trying to work my way through college, and I had to work the graveyard shift. And I had a couple of very abusive bosses, and I won't go into details, but trust me, me too. Me too, but I was a lot younger, I was a lot more vulnerable, and I was powerless. I had to keep that job because I had to live. And I think as I moved up through life and became a licensed architect and got out into the corporate world, things shifted and things changed. But I realize that for so many women, they are dealing with this day in and day out, particularly women of color, particularly women in the service industry, unauthorized workers that are working in hotel rooms right now that are afraid to say anything. And I am here to stand up for those women and fight for them because I am a mama bear and I'm mad as hell and I'm not taking it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oatman. Now, Mr. Kotick.
Great. So, me Too, in full confession, is hard to articulate as a male about how to convey how it affected me. I think what is interesting is 1 in 5 women, right, are affected on a day-to-day basis. And what Me Too did for me personally was it put faces to those numbers. And even more so, what really hit it home, I was a student athlete at Michigan State University. I played soccer there. And Dr. Nazar was our team doctor. And I mean, I didn't know what was going on until I turned on CNN and started communicating with some of the people who were in the athletic department with me. And I think what that showed me is not only the fact that this is not something that can be silenced or isolated or dealt with on our own anymore, but that it's systemic. And that we need to put pieces of legislation and processes in place so that businesses and institutions are held accountable, but also the people who enable those actions. Both are required at this point in time. And above and beyond that, this is systemic, and we need to be integrating education around how to treat people with respect and absence of violence all the way back to elementary schools, primary and secondary schools, and make sure it's ingrained in our education process from the very beginning.
We'll move on to Ms. Payne.
Harassment is about power, and the solution is about accountability. We have to understand that when there's complicit bias in a workplace setting, when other people do nothing, then people who are harassed are alone. And the number one way to change harassment in the corporate environment, actually, is to end forced arbitration agreements and forced NDAs that require women to be silent. We cannot be silent any longer. The reality is so many of us are affected by harassment, and it is an economic issue because who has to leave the job when it happens? Not the executive in power, but the woman who's enduring it and the people who have no recourse. Me Too is a sign of the groundswell to come. It is women speaking out, standing up, and taking a stand, saying no more. And with everyone who says Me Too, I say Me Too. And I say I stand with you, and especially women of color and transgender youth and the people who are most vulnerable in our workplace. We need to make sure that we bring together accountability, respect, and address bias, which, by the way, my company, Fem Inc., has been doing for 5 years with pioneering research on this issue. Thank you.
Ms. Oatman, do you consider yourself a feminist, and how would you define the term?
Feminist. Absolutely. Of course I'm a feminist. I believe that women should be treated exactly the same as a man in the workplace. Equal pay for equal work. There is no reason. Ladies, we've been fighting this battle for 80 years now, when the Fair Pay Act was first brought into being. I think it was 1938. For 80 years, we've been fighting this battle. I know what it's like to be affected by pay inequity. When I first got out of school, I was hired for $6 an hour with a master's in architecture. This was 1983. One of the guys that was hired just about the same time as I found out a year later, he was hired for $10 an hour. So pay equity is huge. And to be a feminist, it's not about becoming a man, because men and women are very different, and thank God we are. I love men. I have nothing against men at all. I love my husband. I love my 4 boys. We are same but different, and thank God we have each other. I hope that no matter how feminism expresses itself, that every single woman in this room considers herself a feminist. And I would hope also that every single man in this room considers himself a feminist as well, because it's not a gender thing. Thank you.
Well, Ms. Oatman, you make a very good point there, and we would like to ask the rest of the candidates, do you consider yourself a feminist? Starting with Mr. Ruda.
Damn right, and damn proud to be. As I said in my opening, I believe the definition of a feminist means that you stand for equal pay, equal access, equal opportunity, equal rights, and equal respect. And I do that every day with the support of my wife and our 4 kids. My wife of 27 years is here, and we have 4 kids. We have 3 boys and a daughter that are all in their early 20s. We've played I Spy Sexism since our boys were little children, and we still do it. My wife and I were in a meeting just a couple weeks ago where some guy said a really bonehead thing, and I texted Kara, I Spy Sexism.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thank you, Mr. Ruda. I should have specified we have 30 seconds for this
Thank you.
We'll move on to Dr. Kierstead. Are you a feminist?
Yeah, absolutely. How can you say no to that, honestly? I grew up in the world of biology and as a neuroscientist, and I grew up in a field where great ideas came from female minds just as often as they came from male minds. I grew up in a situation where I knew equality exists, but then I looked outside of where I am and I see that equality certainly in no way, shape, or form does exist. And that gets worse. It's not just a women's issue.
Thank you,
it gets worse with any minority population.
Thank you, Dr. Kiersted. Moving on to a very relevant topic now, wage inequality. Mr. Kotick, this next question will be for you. The pink tax has been defined as the cost of being female. The pink tax refers to the extra amount women are charged for certain products and services. What measures, if any, do you propose to limit this burden on female consumers?
Yes, I think the pink tax is a fascinating one for me, mainly because I think it's a marketing tactic. It's a marketing tool that is unfairly applied to consumers in this world. I think the first and foremost for me, I think the fact that we are charging a luxury tax for tampons is something that is absolutely crazy to me. I mean, I don't have personal understanding, but it doesn't seem like that's appropriate. But when it comes to things like razors, where a pink razor is more expensive than a male version, I think that's where our feminism needs to come out, and we need to start voting with our dollars. We need to start saying that those things aren't appropriate, and we need to start increasing our ability for women to start small businesses to correct the marketplace with new innovations and new products. And the fact that women are 15 to 20% less likely to get a small business loan, only receiving 7% of venture capital funding, it is critical that we start enabling and empowering women to start businesses and to correct the pink tax that is present in our marketplaces today.
Thank you, Mr. Kotick. Ms. Payne, women still earn less than men at all educational levels, and the wage gap increases over a woman's lifetime and even more disparately affects women of color. What steps would you propose to encourage or mandate businesses to close the gender wage gap?
The greatest gap right now actually exists for women of color and mothers. So over the course of a lifetime, women who give birth face a disproportionate disadvantage over the entire course of their career. So we need to understand what we're doing as a society to prevent this bias against mothers, women of color, and women across the board. There's sectoral bias, so job segregation, certain types of jobs that tend to be disproportionately affecting women. We need to make sure that we have a minimum wage that will actually increase everyone's outcome, by the way, economically. And we need to make sure that we have paid family leave, because that's actually a huge barrier. Did you know that paid family leave is what would drive the economy fastest immediately? That's at least an $80 billion increase to the economy right away. So if we think about how we can create a structure that supports women in the income they earn and their ability to care for their families, and make sure that it's all parents that are included in parental leave and all family members who can be included and who gets taken care of. So there's a multiple prong approach that I would take. Thank you.
Mr. Ruda, currently, as Ms. Payne mentioned, no federal law guarantees paid sick days. The Federal Healthy Family Act would allow workers to earn up to 7 paid sick leave days a year to recover from short-term illness, care for family members, or seek assistance for domestic violence or assault. If elected, would you support this act, and why?
Yes, I would. And I do want to touch on one thing Rachel said that's so important. The pay disparity is very real. It's 79 cents on the dollar for women in general, 65 cents for African American women, and 55 cents for Hispanic women. So we really have a huge pay gap. And to your point, it also rolls over into the further issue of addressing sick leave and parental leave. And there are many pieces of legislation out there. I don't think they go far enough. Some of them are only offering 60 to 70% of the wages during that time. It should be 100%. I think Israel does one of the best things. They have, I believe they just moved it from 12 weeks to 14 weeks of parental leave. And that parental leave can be used, divided, and managed as the parents see fit. So if they want to take 6 weeks simultaneously together to be with their newborn, or they want to mix it up any other way they desire, so be it. Full paid 100% salary during that time, and that's exactly what the United States should pursue.
Mr. Ruda, just to follow up on that, how would you expect to pay for that? Sounds like an expensive program.
You know, it's a fair question, but I look at it, that's basic civility and should be in part of how businesses work. Let's keep in mind, if they don't receive salary during that time, you're talking about people leaving the workforce, or if it's 60% or 60 to 70% of their income, they're going to have reduced income, which means less spending money in the economy and additional needs for social services. So pay them a fair wage and recognize that childbirth is a part of the real world.
Thank you. Dr. Kierstead, women are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth in the United States than in the United Kingdom. If you break that statistic down by race, Black women in the U.S. are about 3 to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy or pregnancy complications than white women. Why are their health outcomes so low, and what legislative solutions can lower these death rates?
You know, that's such a great question, and thank you for asking it. Medicaid pays for half of the births in our country. 1/2 of the births in our country. And Medicaid is the system that is accessed by anyone under a particular socioeconomic level. It is the primary system that is accessed by minorities, LGBT communities, and immigrants to this country. The chipping away at Medicaid is nothing short of an attack on the ability to bear children in a healthy manner. Let alone the fact that 75% of the money that we spend on family planning is also from Medicaid. Chipping away at Medicaid is a way of chipping away at all family values and the ability to plan and take care of children, and it is especially biased against women, against LGBT community, and against immigrants and immigration. Thank you.
Mr. Siddiqui, President Trump has included in his budget a federal paid leave program that would provide new mothers and fathers 6 weeks of paid leave to stay home with their children following the birth or adoption of a child. Should the U.S. mandate paid maternity and/or parental leave?
That's also a very great question. The Family Medical Leave Act of '93 gives maternity leave to new moms. It provides minimum 12 weeks unpaid leave, and the California version of it gives 6 weeks of partial pay. But here's what I propose. If we take $1.50 a week from our payroll tax, that's about $72 a year, across the nation that gives us about $9 billion for full-time workers, which I would propose give 2 to 3 months of paid leave to new parents. That would mean that both parents can take 2 to 3 months, or one of the parents can take 4 to 6 months. I think Trump is not going far enough. We as a nation spend billions on war, and we now need to spend more on our health care. The greatest, most prosperous country in the world should not be suffering health care instead of throwing military parades.
This next question will be for Ms. Oatman, and then we will ask the top 3 VSS scorers. We'll have 30 seconds to respond. Ms. Oatman, do you support a single-payer health care system in the United States, and how would you propose paying for it?
Yes, I absolutely propose a single-payer healthcare system in the United States. We are the only developed nation in the world that does not have that. People should not have to worry about choosing between making a house payment or paying their rent or going to the doctor and going broke. Absolutely. I would stand with Representative John Conyers, who put onto the floor a bill that was H.R. 676, Medicare for All. And basically it's paid for by 2 ways: gross tax receipts from large and medium-sized businesses, and any small business like ours that is less than $2 million in receipts would not have to pay anything into that. And then additionally, there would be a sales tax, a luxury tax on things that are just not necessary. So those are the 2 ways that we would pay for the Medicare for All. And people would not have to pay deductibles. They wouldn't have to pay Co-pays, it would be free. And this would tie in so well with this paid family leave because it's high time that women are equal to men. And the way to get there is that for us to have full reproductive care, we shouldn't have to worry about whether or not we can pay to go to the doctor to get birth control pills or to take care of our reproductive needs. I mean, the only way that women are ever going to be equally treated to men is to have full reproductive access, and that includes abortion. Thank you.
Mr. Ruda, you have 30 seconds now.
We already have two single-payer systems in our country, Veteran Affairs and Medicaid. And as I stated before, I am for Medicare for all. But we also have to make sure any legislation has a timeline that prevents unintended and unanticipated consequences happening. We have 18.5% of our GDP tied up in healthcare. So the first thing we need to do is open up Medicare for all and allow anybody to join that wants to, and still allow private insurance for those who want to pay for it on their own. That with the individual mandate, it would be a good first step towards Medicare for all.
Thank you. Dr. Kierstead.
I'm very much for a single-payer system, Medicare for all, and believe that tunes to the current system affected extremely quickly can actually increase the amount of money available for it. Pricing transparency, medical records reform, generics access will be three of my primary bills put out to tune that program, save the money that it'll take to institute that single-payer system.
Mr. Kotick, this next question is for you. Should the government cover gender affirmation surgeries for trans soldiers?
Yes. Okay.
We can leave it at that if you like.
That's all right. So the way that I've always perceived those who are serving in our military is that if they are defending our country, if they believe in what America is and they are willing to put their life on the line, then we should service them as well. I believe that they are the bravest people in this country who are willing to put their lives on the line to defend our freedom, and the fact that we are threatening to turn our backs on them when they need it most is not acceptable to me, so I do support it.
Thank you. This next question is kind of open for all of you. Are there any other candidates that believe the government shouldn't cover gender affirmation surgeries for trans soldiers under its military health care plan?
The only thing I would add, I would encourage everybody to go watch Samantha Bee segment on Dana Rohrabacher and this specific topic, because Samantha Bee got it right, just as Michael said as well, and we all agree up here. And you'll have a good laugh.
Okay. Ms. Payne, President Trump's $1.4 trillion budget for 2018 cut deeply into social programs to pay for legislative priorities such as a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border and a larger defense budget. Over the next decade, his budget calls for slashing more than $800 billion from Medicaid, the federal health care program that provides more than 25 million low-income women with health care coverage. Would sustaining programs like Medicare and Medicaid be a priority to you if elected? And if so, how would you balance the cost of these programs against the burgeoning federal debt?
The tax cut that was issued to the top 1% in corporations in America is a burden for the future generations to come. It's actually the worst piece of legislation that could have ever been passed for that reason. We need to shore up the healthcare system we have today. We need to cut out waste, arbitration. We need to make sure, or arbitrage, sorry. We need to make sure that everyone in America has access to quality health care, and the way that we would do that is to repeal some of the permanent tax cuts that were put into place that will actually cost us trillions of dollars, not just in this immediate tax cut, but in lost future opportunity, because it's putting a tax on the lowest income workers by 2027. It's actually cutting into the middle class and our ability to compete in the world. It cuts into graduate students' opportunities to get ahead because it's taxing their subsidized education, and it's also creating a situation where we're impoverishing the many in order to create permanent tax cuts for the few. So by repealing certain aspects of this, we could actually create the right corporate incentives that really would create jobs, which is what this was called. we could actually create the incentives for investing in the future of jobs and the labor force, and we would actually take back the capital that's just being handed over, such as the estate tax cuts, such as all of the other cuts to permanent, wealthy individuals who are at the very highest echelons in our society. And what we really need to focus on is how we shore up the middle class and the working class. Thank you.
Just a follow-up question for you, Ms. Payne. This is just a yes/no question. Would you pledge to protect Medicare and Medicaid?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Ruda, in the 2014 Hobby Lobby case, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, for-profit corporations may deny insurance coverage for their employees' birth control because of the business owner's personal religious beliefs, even though such coverage was mandated under the Affordable Care Act. Explain your position on legislation that would eliminate or limit a woman's ability to access the full range of FDA-approved prescription contraceptive methods at no cost.
As I said earlier, I would have free, accessible birth control across the United States of America. And that would be federally legislated, and I think that sums it up.
What about if an employer is seeking to use a religious reason for denying that?
No, absolutely not.
Thank you. Dr. Kierstead, in recent years, Planned Parenthood's health center's ability to continue to provide preventative health care services, including birth control and cancer screenings, has been under attack at both the federal and state levels. For example, in 2007, Vice President Mike Pence, as a member of Congress, sponsored a bill designed to cut off federal health care funding to Planned Parenthood centers that provide preventative health care. Since that time, there have been 17 votes to defund Planned Parenthood affiliate health centers from preventative health grant programs and Medicaid. What is your stance on efforts to eliminate federal or state funding for Planned Parenthood health centers?
I hope you notice this badge. I'm an extremely strong advocate for Planned Parenthood. I'm running a clinical trial right now treating women with ovarian cancer at Hoag Hospital. And I have been brought deep into this issue, and honestly, I'm in it with all my heart. If you take away prophylactic care, if you take away diagnosis, what you're left with is harm and hardship on a family, but in addition, an economic burden on our society that is some 20 times higher than the money it would take to prevent it. We must stand up against these denigrations of Planned Parenthood with all of our might, all of our voices, and it starts right here.
Thank you. Mr. Siddiqui, do minors have the right to an abortion without parental consent or notification?
That's a tough one. Having two daughters of my own, ages 12, she just turned 12 last Sunday, and 7, obviously I want to be a part of every decision. But I think it's important that my daughters, if they don't feel comfortable going to me or their mother, have somewhere to go, someone to talk to. That is going to be key. And that, in my opinion, one of the first things I did when I announced my candidacy, even before I hired a campaign manager, is I went straight to Planned Parenthood. And I saw that Planned Parenthood was an institution that provided remarkable services for everybody. Planned Parenthood offers more than just cancer screenings or birth control or low-cost referrals. They provide counseling, they provide education, they provide advice. And that, I think, is what's critical in a decision like that.
Mr. Ruda, same question.
I think the woman has complete control over her reproductive rights regardless of age. But we also need to recognize that the Trump administration and the far right is continuing to narrow the opportunities for women to be able to make those decisions by defunding Planned Parenthood, by setting up the TRAP laws, which eliminate the ability for abortion providers to have the right permits and accessibility to provide safe, secure abortions, as well as other activities in many states. We need to respect Roe v. Wade and continue to make abortion legal, accessible across the U.S., regardless of age.
Thank you. To follow up with Mr. Siddiqui, can you give a yes/no answer on that? Do minors have the right to abortion without parental consent or notification?
Well, as an attorney, the challenge is that legally minors do not have the legal right to make decisions. But I think in this circumstance, it's a woman's body. Minors do have that right if they want it.
Dr. Kierstead, same question.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Oatman?
Yes.
Mr. Kotick?
Yeah, I think I'll echo what others. Was that a yes or no question, or did I get to ramble a little bit?
You can ramble for 30 seconds if you'd like to. I mean, speak eloquently.
It's a tough stretch for me, but we'll figure it out. I think the importance is the conversation. I think that at that age, the importance is having the conversation and making sure that the impact is understood, that the gravity of the situation is understood. And to that extent, as long as that conversation is being had by the parents or at Planned Parenthood, I do to support that decision.
Ms. Payne?
Yes, and I would also like to add that the current battle in the administration to attack Title X funding, which affects the ability for Planned Parenthood to get reimbursed for critical services that they provide for women who are in need, is something that we cannot allow to be politicized. These are already expenses that have been paid out. This is what will prevent women from accessing services. And by the way, Planned Parenthood often serves as the only healthcare clinic for women in their areas. And half of the women in this country use Planned Parenthood.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, Ms. Payne. Ms. Oatman, Dana Rohrabacher has said we should scrap DACA legislation to avoid encouraging other people to come to America to obtain benefits. What plan would you propose for these dreamers who were brought here as children? And can someone tell me, is Nancy Pelosi still speaking?
Yes.
Here's to Nancy Pelosi.
Odds are yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dana Rohrabacher also believes that there was a civilization on Mars 1,000 years ago. Dana Rohrabacher is a complete nut job. He doesn't believe in climate change. He wants to throw out anybody whose skin is brown and doesn't look like him. That man no longer represents us. He doesn't represent me. He doesn't represent anybody I see in this room. We need to get that guy out of here. It's time for him to go. And I'm telling you, I was very proud of Nancy Pelosi today, standing on the floor talking for 8 hours straight. But I hope she stands strong tomorrow as well. I hope that was just the opening shot, because, you know, Democrats, seriously, the Republicans are so damn strong all the time. They gather together, they lock arms, and they say, we're not budging. Democrats were like, well, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't be so tough. Maybe we should, kind of meet in the middle. You know what? We need to stand strong when it's something we really believe in. And we believe in our dreamers, and we're not sending them back. We want a fast, permanent, swift, compassionate path to citizenship for every single dreamer. And I'll go beyond that. All of these TPS folks that are being thrown out of the country, that are in fear, the San Salvadorans, the Haitians, it's time for us to really look at our immigration system and put together a very quick, compassionate
Mr.
path.
Ruda, what would be your plan for the dreamers brought here as children? You have 30 seconds to respond.
I've stated numerous times I support Senate Bill 744 that was passed by the Senate in 2013 by a 2-to-1 margin with bipartisan support. It went to the House of Representatives, and Boehner never let it out of committee because he was afraid, he was threatened by the Tea Party that he would lose his speakership. That plan had again, bipartisan support for a path to citizenship for dreamers, as well as meeting the security of the U.S. I would support that bill.
Dr. Kierstead?
I also second that. Let's definitely support that vote. I've noticed that dreamers have a higher likelihood of getting an education and a job than native-born Americans. They have a drive and a passion in this country. Why are we ripping families apart? We need a clean DREAM Act. No, nothing but.
Mr. Siddiqui.
Thank you. Let me be clear. We need a clean DACA bill. Not a single cent should go towards building a ridiculous wall, a wall of division, a wall of exclusion, a wall of hate. And besides, as an engineer, I prefer bridges over walls anyway. We cannot negotiate lives for money. We simply cannot do it. DACA is the first step, but we need comprehensive reform for the other 11 million undocumented people. We cannot punish them for coming forward. We have to streamline the process.
Siddiqui. The next question is for Mr. Kotick. Opponents of safe and legal abortion have tried to erode access to abortion through a range of restrictions. Last year, in Whole Woman's Health, the Supreme Court ruled that state laws that do not enhance patient safety, rather they punish women by blocking access to safe abortion, cannot stand. Explain your position on legislation that attempts to criminalize healthcare providers, impose medically unnecessary restrictions for doctors and facilities, or otherwise interfere with the doctor-patient relationship.
It's a full-throated question. So I think that the clarity here is that we need to go all the way back to the beginning and say that we have decided a long time ago, and we will stand strong, that a woman's right to choose and make her own choices with her own body is the law of the land. That is undeniable, and that is clear. I think as we start to think about these attacks, that's why it's so important that we flip the House in 2018, because we are seeing cracks through partisanship on those fundamental rights that we have established as a country. We need to defend those. I will also tell you that outside of the fact that of the laws that are being passed at a state level, the thing that consumes my brain is accessibility. There are numerous cases. I'll give you a case of Missouri. Missouri is one of those states that is making it difficult for abortions to be conducted in the state of Missouri, and you have people who are driving all the way 7, 8, 9 hours at a time to make the best choice they can for their life. That's not right. And that accessibility that Planned Parenthood provides and that other facilities provide, frankly, is the thing that we need to be focusing on and make sure that we're fighting for.
A follow-up yes-no question to you. Would you support a waiting period before women could have an abortion?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Payne, according to the New York Times in 2016, 2/3 of women in prison were being held for nonviolent offenses, including drug and shoplifting offenses, while 60% of incarcerated women identify as mothers. This contributes to the 2.6 million American children who have a parent in prison or jail and the enormous price we as a society pay for that situation. What, if any, are practical legislative solutions to address this problem?
To add to your statistics, this is an 800% increase among black women. So this is actually a disproportionately racist issue as well. We need to take into consideration, yes, our criminal justice system is not just, it's criminal. And what we need to focus on is keeping families together and not putting people behind bars for the rest of their life or for decades and missing out on raising their families because of non-violent offenses. Importantly, there was a recent study that was conducted that showed that children who were born to women in jail face greater duress than losing a parent to death. We can't keep separating people like this. We can't have women giving birth in jail for nonviolent offenses. And we have to take a look at the private industrial complex of private prisons, because they are the ones who are actually creating the incentives for arresting people en masse, especially in communities of color. Thank you.
Mr. Ruda, transgender women are often misgendered in jail and are at risk for rape or other safety concerns and may be denied medicine. ICE recently canceled its contract that created a pod of safety for these women and gay men, and at least 9 trans women were shipped to a detention center in rural Mexico. In New Mexico. Would protecting incarcerated transgender women be a priority for you? And what, if anything, would you propose to do about these situations?
Yeah, it certainly has to get addressed, because I actually believe in what some countries are doing, and I believe California is heading this way, where birth certificates are non-gender specific. Because a vast underreported number of people have gender identity different than what was given to them by a doctor at birth. And that follows through to whether it's the prison system or elsewhere. So we have to make accommodations, whether it's the military, whether it is prisons, whether it's any public institution. I look at it that we should have gender-free bathrooms. They seem to work in my household, and except I am required to put the toilet seat down. But I'm not making light. This is an important topic, and we certainly need to address it, not just in prisons, but all institutions.
Thank you. Dr. Kierstead, Governor Brown has worked to lower incarceration levels in California through initiatives that reduced nonviolent, non-serious crimes to misdemeanors and implementing California's fair chance hiring law. Do you agree or disagree with his work? What changes would you push for at the federal level to reduce incarceration rates, particularly in minority communities that are disproportionately affected by mass incarceration?
A fantastic question. You know, we spend more money in this state on incarceration than we do in higher education. It is a horrible state of affairs. And with incarceration, we don't respect individuals, LGBTQ individuals. We don't respect the special needs of women in these types of situations and what they're facing, being away from the home. It is different. These populations are facing different challenges than the average male in incarceration, and special allowances need to be made for that. I support the overhaul of the incarceration system, both for economic but also for personal socio respect to individuals within those, and would also support taking these actions that we've started here in California and replicating them nationally.
Mr. Siddiqui, 80% of people killed by firearms annually in the U.S. by intimate partners are women, with a woman being fatally shot by her current or former intimate partner every 16 hours. What legislative solution could address this issue in a Republican-controlled Congress?
Thank you for this question. Given my work with the FBI on counterterrorism and national security, gun safety is a huge issue for me. Domestic violence, violent offenders should not be able to have a gun, period. We need universal background checks, and in response to the question, we have to close those loopholes, like the boyfriend loophole and the gunfare loophole, where background checks are not as mandatory, or not mandatory at all. On average, 96 Americans are killed with guns every day. It needs to stop. It averages 50 women are shot to death by their partners. We should not live in fear knowing that abusive husbands or partners have gun access. That's not what we're about. I want to, at this point, give a shout out to Moms Demand Action. That is an organization of moms that has come forward to effectuate that change, and that's a grassroots level change. Support Moms on Demand Action. I am.
Mr. Siddiqui, could you give some examples of legislation that you might pass in order to achieve the goals you've stated?
Sure. One thing that needs to happen is the point of purchase display. You need to make sure that whenever you acquire a gun or purchase a gun, that there's an extensive background check. There needs to be federal legislation that does extensive background checks, not just on those that have restraining orders, that have domestic violence issues, that have violent crimes, but also, if you're on the no-fly list, which is a whole other issue for another topic, for another debate, you can buy a gun if you're on the no-fly list. That has to be changed as well. There should be legislation on that issue as well.
Ms. Oatman, in a recent survey of 25 cities, 28% of mayors cited domestic violence as the leading cause of homelessness among families with children. With the growing homeless population in Los Angeles and Orange counties, how can we combat cases of domestic violence that result in homelessness for Orange County women and children?
Well, homelessness is a huge issue, and it's growing here in District 48. I mean, we are seeing more and more homeless people out on the streets in Costa Mesa, the Santa Ana River, and it is a very multi-pronged problem. It's not something that's we can fix with, let's just build a shelter for 50 beds here, or, you know, let's take care of a small little piece here. We can't fix this with Band-Aid solutions. We need a brand new Congress that is going to look at a giant holistic approach to approaching this problem in many different ways. We need affordable housing. We need universal health care, including mental health, so that people don't have to go without the prescription drugs that they need. We need to address education. Free education should be a right for all. Jobs, trainings, programs, helping people get their jobs. Everybody wants to work. What we need to do is revamp and restructure the way we are spending our federal tax dollars. Right now, federal tax dollars are mostly going to the military war machine. What we need to be doing is addressing homelessness in a holistic, progressive way by creating jobs, raising the minimum wage, supporting the working class, creating affordable housing, tuition, Medicare for all. Let's take care of our people, because then we will address once and for all the homelessness issue. Thank you.
Ms. Oatman. Moving to Mr. Kotick. The U.S. ranks first among developing nations in rates of both teen pregnancy and sexually transmitted disease. Since 1982, Congress has spent approximately $2 billion on abstinence-only until marriage programs, yet no study in a professional peer-reviewed journal has found these programs to be broadly effective. What measures, if any, would you take to federally mandate comprehensive sexual education programs aimed at reducing teen pregnancy and STDs?
So I don't think abstinence education works very well. So I think there's actually a very simple solution to this. I think the simple truth is that we have to tie any federal funding that goes to an educational institution the requirement to have responsible sex education practices. That being said, there is freedoms in that, right? There is freedoms for religious institutions to practice abstinence, but they will not receive federal funding for those practices. So I think we need to draw that distinction line very clear. And to circle back on one point that I made previously, I actually think we need to expand it a little bit wider, in the sense that we need to make sure that we include things around violence prevention into our sex education practices. And in addition to that, make sure that we're addressing one of the most alarming stats that I've seen, which is that 40% of teenage women actually know someone who's being abused by a boyfriend or a lover, and that is a systemic issue that's tracking all the way down to our primary and secondary education institutions.
Thank you. Ms. Payne, you've mentioned this in your opening statement, and I wanted to come back to it. How can the American corporate environment encourage women in STEM fields, and should Congress work to incentivize corporations? So, how?
Women in STEM. The rate of women going into STEM careers has actually declined over the last 30 years, and that's a combination of factors. It's the culture, it's the corporate culture, it's the lack of opportunity to advance because women are being held back. It's also the media and our culture and the way in which women are represented. We know that media actually shapes how young girls see themselves and their opportunities in life. So this is an approach that requires us to look at the whole culture of what we're creating. Within the corporate environment, there are programs, and I help lead many of them. I was actually on the founding team of Women at Google, which was designed to foster and mentor young women in tech careers. I've also worked with the Department of State at their Tech at State initiative to mentor women all over the world in engineering and to help encourage them to start startups in the technology industry. There's actually great programs that could be scaled up immediately and that are very effective. And it ranges from education to mentorship, access to opportunity, direct connection to other people in their peer group who can help them think through and work through issues. And it also includes our culture and our media culture and the way in which women are being represented in careers that are not technical. And I have a lot of research about that. We actually wrote a white paper on how media shapes perceptions of women in STEM. So I'd encourage you to check that out in my company. But the point is that there's so many things we can do because it's effective. We know how to solve this problem. And we also need to make sure that women at the helm don't fall off the glass cliff. And that's another issue I'd like to take up later. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ruda, assuming you support Head Start and public school education, how do you plan to help fund these types of programs and possibly universal preschool for single mothers raising children on modest incomes in more socioeconomically challenged communities?
I've been a strong supporter of P through C and skill-based development of our youth. K through 12 worked great after World War II, but we are in a world now, a global economy, where whoever has the smartest kids wins. So if you go to harleyforcongress.com, you will see my education plan where I call for P through C education free for the lower socioeconomic levels and subsidized as you move up into higher income at public schools. It's absolutely imperative that we educate our kids and make sure that higher education is accessible. It is the #1 thing that will drive jobs long term. We have a shrinking middle class. We have 3 individuals that their combined wealth, Bezos, Gates, and Warren Buffett, their combined wealth equals the bottom 50% of Americans. If we do not address the middle class by providing free and accessible higher education to our youth, then we are doomed to maintain the democracy as strong as we have had it for these 200+ years.
Thank you. Dr. Kierstead, our current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has a plan to privatize education through government-subsidized charter schools and vouchers for public schools. What are your thoughts on the future of funding public education, particularly as it again impacts lower-income communities?
Well, first of all, we need to get rid of DeVos. Like, what is that about? Education is the #1 contributor to socioeconomic mobility. It's a very, very important thing to remember. Education for those that can afford it? No. Education for those that can't afford it. It is the thing that is driving women, LGBTQ, immigrants, lower income families up to new heights. I came to this country with not a dollar in my pocket from a very poor family. My education was paid for by the government. I became a professor, I ran companies, and I've been able to help people my whole career. There is absolutely no reason why we can't extend that now to individuals. Our tax system is what does it. We need to flip that thing. Again, from the large corporations and the wealthy to the middle class. That is how we build a nation.
Thank you. Mr. Siddiqui, women constitute 56% of the student population of colleges across the United States. A report by the American Association of University Women found that on average, women hold almost 2/3 of the country's $1.3 trillion student debt. The heavier load of student debt that female and minority students carry has significant consequences post-graduation if they don't drop out of school from the weight of their debt. What are your solutions to the burgeoning student debt crisis in America?
That's an excellent question. By show of red cards, how many people have student debt? $14.6 trillion of student loan debt is out there, and that bubble is going to burst because there's a lot of students who cannot afford to pay that. It is a women's issue crisis. Why? Well, because it prevents women from working in public service. It prevents finding viable jobs. It forces underemployment. As Ms. Weiss mentioned, women hold 2/3 of the country's loan debt. But if you add the gender gap to that, you have a major crisis. What we need to do moving forward is we need to make college fees affordable and or free. We need to make sure that college, to pay for it, would obviously be a fraction of what the GOP tried to attempt in their tax fraud recently. Women are paying higher costs for equal opportunity is not equal. There must be legislation to provide opportunities to pay off student loan debt, to refi that debt, provide them job opportunities where they can actually take jobs commensurate with their education. There needs to be a system that would account for what jobs you can and cannot take given how much debt you have. It's a crisis we have to deal with, and that must be legislated.
Ms. Oatman, the Child Care and Dependent Care Tax Credit provides a modest benefit to help families defray costs associated with child care. Families with children receive a maximum of $1,000 annually for one child and $2,000 annually for more than 2 children. When on average in the U.S. it is estimated the yearly cost of child care ranges around $11,000. Is a larger tax cut in order, or are there other alternatives?
Yes, the tax reform plan that Trump has is absolutely devastating. It goes 70% of those benefits go to the 0.01%, while the rest of us, the working and the middle class family, are getting nailed. Now, basically, in there was, you know, that they were going to increase the child tax credit from $1,000 to $1,600, but that is just sort of the carrot that he's dangling out there, because at the other side of that, we're getting taxed immensely. Child care has gone up, now somebody's going to fact check me on this, something like 250% over the last 10 years. It is insane, and I don't know how anybody can pay for childcare anymore. And these poor working women that have children, single moms, they don't know what to do. I know, well, I have 5 kids, and so after baby number 3 was born, I basically had to stay home for a little while, and thank God I was able to do that. I was blessed to have a husband that was able to kind of take care of us and support us. We were able to cut back on all kinds of expenses and stay home and raise those kids for a little while. But for most people, they don't have that option. And the tax plan needs to work for the working and the middle class family. Right now, it is completely topsy-turvy. So when I get to Congress and we have a blue Congress, we are going to revoke that tax plan from Trump's hands and do something that's going to work for all of us.
Ms. Oatman.
Thank you.
Moving to Mr. Kotick. Today, women still struggle. This actually is something that you and Ms. Payne addressed in your opening statements. Women still struggle to access capital they need to expand or start businesses. The opportunity cost is profound, given that women's economic impact is magnified by a multiplier effect. Women are more likely than men to plow their earnings back into their communities, fostering prosperity and stability. While women are creating more businesses than ever before, they are starting their businesses with half as much capital as men. In 2016, only 11% of SBA loans were awarded to women-owned businesses. Women-owned businesses, as you cited earlier, receive only 7% of venture capital investment dollars, and black female entrepreneurs 0.2% of venture dollars. If elected, what would you do to help bridge the funding and opportunity gap for women entrepreneurs, particularly those of color?
So I think there's a couple things that we can do. So just to repeat some of the stats that I mentioned earlier, when it comes to small business loans in a traditional sense, women are receiving about 25% less than men. And then from a venture capital perspective, about 7% of venture capital dollars. Now, I think part of it has to do with oversight. So the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau that oversees some of those actions, obviously Mick Mulvaney, who was, I think it was like a hostile takeover that he went in there and started to run that agency. I believe what we need to do is make sure that we have proper oversight, that there is equity in the process, and make sure that we legislate to ensure that there is equity and that each business idea is judged on its merit and doesn't have any other slants to it whatsoever.
Thank you. Ms. Payne, super PACs disproportionately represent men. What do you believe the impact of Citizens United is on the women's movement?
So Citizens United has done more to disrupt our democracy than anything else. It's the flow of money into politics to ensure that we're perpetuating a power system that prefers those who have over those who don't. Citizens United allows for unlimited funding into candidates that support corporations and their priorities. I think there's a number of examples that we can point to. The gun industry is a good one. And what we need to remember is that by having that kind of unlimited funding, we know that women have a harder time to compete. Hey, by the way, I know this game. I've been here. Whether it's in tech or politics, it's always easier for men of a certain type to get access to capital and support. And this creates a very harmful feedback loop where the more they get ahead and the more women have to struggle to make up to that difference, that disparity just keeps perpetuating over time. And Citizens United has institutionalized that, and it's corrupted our government. Is that time? Oh, okay. The first thing we need to do is focus on how we get more capital to women, how we support broad-based efforts. I think Karen Bass's current PAC, Sea Change, is all about this, and I really appreciate what she's doing in Congress. There are many other women. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, she has an incredible effort called Off the Sidelines, which is all about getting women activated in government and making sure that they run to represent us, because the one thing we know is that until women are in Congress, our priorities will never be the agenda.
We are now moving to an extra fun part of the debate where the candidates will be able to ask questions of each other. We will move in voter support score order, and candidates are free to ask any other candidate a question, so one candidate may be asked multiple questions. We will begin, and these questions have been submitted to the moderator team ahead of time and have been acceptable. We'll start with Mr. Ruda.
and I'm going to read it since I submitted it for approval, so I want to get it right. Laura, you recently wrote a guest post on the blog Crazy Dana about the need to excite our base. Do you agree with me that the Democratic Party is strengthened by having strong, diverse candidates from many backgrounds running to represent our party? And do you agree that the choice should be left to grassroots activists like the folks here tonight instead of DC insiders?
Yes, thank you, Harley, for that. Yes, I did respond to that Crazy Dana blog post. I hope you all saw that, where basically they were saying that, you know, they were talking about the attorney and the scientist and calling the men by their occupations. They were calling me the health lady. You know, I mean, so I responded forcefully. I will always stand up for what I believe in. And to Harley's point, I think it's way too soon for us to be gathering around one particular candidate. I think we need to allow this process to play out. Now, I know everybody's nervous. I know you guys are nervous, but it's going to happen. Give it one more month, give it a little bit longer, and it's all going to come together. It's just too soon for insiders in the party to be dictating, you know, who should be the candidate. Thank you.
Dr. Kierstead, your question.
Laura, I've got another question for you.
Oh.
So I think Congress can do more to make women feel safe in the workplace and on college campuses, like passing the federal affirmative consent law that California passed in the state. What do you propose Congress does to prevent sexual assault and harassment in that workplace?
This is on the California campuses, basically, is that your question?
No, federally.
Federally, okay. That's a really good question. You know, right now Title IX takes care of, sorry, it's Title X is the one that, no, Title IX is the one that prevents discrimination against women. And that discrimination also includes harassment, rape, and assault. And right now that is currently under attack, again, by Betsy DeVos, who is picking that apart and saying, you know, well, maybe we're leaning a little bit too hard on these guys. Maybe we should, you know, look at this more carefully before we're listening to these women that are claiming they've been raped and abused and that sort of thing. So I think what we need to do is, first of all, like you had said, Hans, get rid of Betsy DeVos, number one, because she is working against women every step of the way, and make sure that that Title X, I'm always getting the 10, it's a Roman numerals, I'm always getting them backwards. Title IX funding stays locked firmly in place so that we can prevent further harassment and discrimination on college campuses.
Mr. Siddiqui has waived his question. We will move to Ms. Oatman.
Oh, okay. Gosh, I'm doing a lot of talking up here. Okay, my question is for Rachel, actually. We had a really great debate in Seal Beach Leisure World a couple weeks ago. And there was a fascinating question that I thought was very important that everybody know the answer to. The question was asked by Josh Lowenthal that basically, if polling is done and it is found that you have less than 20% of Democratic support, which is roughly equivalent to less than 10% overall support, will you consider dropping out of the race and standing behind the one or two candidates that do have that sort of support in the Democratic Party?
I think we all need to consider the possibility that we do not want to split the vote, and that's a very real concern. We are early in this process, and our March filings will be a very important time for many of us to make that critical decision. Polling matters, funding matters, there's a number of criteria. I, too, take that seriously, and I would be happy to consider my role in ensuring that we not only flip this seat, but importantly, we put a woman in it.
Moving on, Mr. Kotick.
Laura, you're the popular kid in school today.
I'm so popular.
So this one's actually for those who are live streaming in, because I think what's great about this and the great candidates that I've had the privilege to get to know, most of them since July of last year, we have a bunch of strong candidates, and I hope you all see that, and I hope you're excited as I am to be a part of this group.
So you're going to join my team? Is that what you're about to ask?
Signing up.
You're welcome.
So there are 2 women in this race. That being said, there are some races across the country. It's really hard to not look at you. There are some races across the country that do not have a woman in it, and we all know that women's issues we heard today are very, very important. What criteria or advice would you give to people who are in districts who don't have a woman running about how to assess a candidate based on how well they would progress a women's issues? Excuse me. What things should they be looking for?
I think you should look at that person's life story. I mean, we can stand up here and talk about, the issues, and for so many of us, we are so similar in the way that we look at issues, and especially women's issues, for sure. Every single man up here is a feminist. I am certain of that. So if you are looking at a field of 100% men, make sure you learn about their story. How do they treat their wife or their girlfriend or their daughter? How have they raised their daughters? How do they treat their mother? How do they respond to women? Do they treat them with respect? Do they treat them equally? I think that is more important than almost anything else. And then, of course, legislatively, too, to see if there's anything that they've done. They're women co-workers as well, absolutely, yes. And what else, guys? Let's open it up, because I'm talking too much. Ladies, what else would make you want to vote for a man?
Time.
Anybody? No? Oh, time, never mind.
Time, thank
I
you.
thought I was taking over the meeting here.
We will move on. Ms. Payne, your question.
I would ask this to everyone, but I'm only allowed to ask one person. Recently, there have been a lot of claims of sexual harassment at the highest levels of our government, the administration included, and many people have stepped down. If anyone here, and I have to ask one person, so Hans, if anyone here has had credible allegations of sexual harassment or assault that arise during the course of this election, would they please consider stepping down? Thank you.
I agree. Yeah, that was easy. I think that's my answer. I agree. Yeah. Was that a question?
Yes, yeah. I was asking for, oh, you got it? Would they consider stepping down if there are credible claims of sexual harassment or assault?
Of course.
Okay. Easy. We will now move to the candidates' closing statements. We'll do this in reverse voter support score order, starting with Ms. Payne. You have 60 seconds.
We need to empower everyone in this society to reach their full potential. From a young age, girls are told that their value is in how they look, not in who they are or what they can do. Gender does not make anyone less important, less capable, or less deserving. I experienced many of the issues that we've discussed tonight, and for all the people in here who have said me too, I stand with you. I want to make sure that we understand that you need to vote for candidates who not only talk about the issues, but have lived them and understand them and have worked on them. I have worked throughout my career on issues affecting women, whether it's access to reproductive health, whether it's a Violence Against Women Act, or working on the board of an NGO voted best in the world on giving women more access to credit, reproductive health, and education. I ask you to consider the best way to put priorities of women front and center in the federal government is to vote for women. And we need to start believing in them. So let's turn this wave into a wave for women. Thank you.
Mr. Kotick.
So we've spent the last hour or so talking about a lot of these issues. And we all talked about what we stood for. But I think what we haven't talked about enough is how much and how urgent these issues are. We have not talked about the fact that when we talk about pay equality and we say that women are making 80 cents on the dollar, if we continue to go at our current rate, it's going to take over 40 years for pay equality to actually happen. We need to create a sense of urgency, and we need to get to work. The issues we talked about today are one of a series of issues. We have a series of debates coming up on foreign policy, on immigration, on healthcare. All of those are important. You all have been absolutely incredible tonight. I'm excited to have you back for each one of those debates, because the fact of the matter is you have to be energized, passionate, and excited about who you're putting into this race, because to flip this district, there needs to be passion and energy. Thank you.
Excuse me, Ms. Oatman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Joanna, and all of you for everything you've done for us tonight. And thank you to my other candidates. Remember what we're doing here. We're choosing a representative. And what does that word mean? It's somebody who represents you. Somebody who represents you. Now, ladies, we have less than 1 in 5 in Congress that are women, and we desperately need some more female representation in Congress. I don't know about you, but when I saw those guys standing around the Rose Garden signing away our reproductive rights, it made me angry. And that's part of the reason why I'm standing here. We need women in Congress. And look at choosing that person. Maybe I'm not the guy that's raised the most money up here, but I will represent you. I have not Google searched these issues. I've not memorized these issues. I've lived these issues. Thank you.
Mr. Siddiqui.
Women's rights are human rights. And men, we need to do a better job listening, understanding, and supporting wives, sisters, daughters, mothers, coworkers. Time's up for the good old boys club. We're at the forefront of a new era of accountability, and I've spent my entire life fighting for the underprivileged and the underrepresented. As a father of 2 girls, ages 12 and 7, this is personal to me, and I ask for your support and your vote. I can't do this alone. I need you. This is a team effort. I wake up every day wondering what we need to do to make this world better, what we can do for our kids. I am a son of immigrants. President Trump, if you're watching, Dana Rohrabacher, if you're watching, time's up. Come November, we're going to grab you by the midterms. Please visit omarinthehouse.com. It would be my honor to have your support. It is my honor to be a part of the women's discussion today.
Thank you. Dr. Kierstead.
Well, I want to thank you for curating this. It's been wonderful. And thank you to Indivisible OC, and thanks to all of you for your passion and your commitment. And thanks to those Democrats standing up in the House for 8 or 9 hours fighting for DACA. You know, to all those immigrants, to the LGBTQ community, to all women that are standing up and fighting in the day-to-day with a world that's stacked against them, with a world that is taking their ideas and interrupting them, to a world that's not giving them the pay that they deserve. I want you to know that I'm there for you. It would be my honor to represent you, and you will be my special interest group. Thank you.
Mr. Ruda.
We started this campaign almost a year ago. And since then, we have tens of thousands of followers on social media, donors, contributors, supporters, and volunteers. We have raised more money and have more cash on hand than even Dana Rohrabacher. And the closest next is Omar, who's doing a great campaign as well. I know that with your support, that we can beat Dana Rohrabacher. And I'm asking for your support because I know together we can start the blue wave right here in Orange County and take it across the United States and turn our country from red to blue. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like for us to give the candidates a big round of applause for their... Before we bring Lulu Hamad back on, just wanted to take the opportunity to thank my fact-checking team, Stephanie Hammerwald, Katie Calvoda, and Gilisa Gaffney, as well as the partners here tonight. In particular, working with Lulu and Aaron and Sarah has been a great privilege. Their professionalism and their friendship both mean a lot to me. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. The evening has come to a close. We hope that you've enjoyed it and have learned about our candidates and learned from them as much as we did. Thank you, our wonderful, wonderful candidates for the great job. Thank you for the time and the effort that you put into this. We really appreciate it. I'd like to thank Joanna and Gialisa and Katie and Stephanie for a great job. I'd like to thank all the men and women who have donated generously to make this evening and this debate possible. I would like to ask all our guests who received, who got champion tickets to stand up so we can thank you. If they're still there, they're gone. I'd like to thank all the volunteers. I'd like to thank all the families and the friends of the people, everybody who worked on this debate. And before everybody goes, please fill out those surveys that we gave to you. We'll use them to construct a straw poll to see how the candidates performed today and to see what you think of tonight. Please fill them out, and our wonderful volunteers at the 2 center doors will collect them from you in the you can just drop them in the red and white and blue baskets. If you don't have one, our volunteers will have one ready for you. Please also come to our next debate on March 6th at UCI. The next debate is going to be on immigration and foreign policy. You'll find more information at the Indivisible OC48 table outside. I'd like to thank Sarah Lowell for her immense, I'm running out of words, for her amazing leadership. I feel like people always mention me and Erin, but they don't know the work that Sarah does behind the scenes. We're more than grateful. This would not have been done without her effort. Thank you so much. We're so grateful. I guess with that, we bring the evening to a close. Thank you so much. You've been wonderful. Thanks a lot for attending.